Thank you, Manfella, Susanna, Frederick, and Thomas. It was great to hear that extremely important perspective, the development perspective on the democracy agenda. We've now gone through all of our agenda, all of our main sessions. I take my hat off to those of you that have sat in sessions all day. I know that they have been incredibly rich, incredibly rewarding sessions, but I know that also it's a huge amount of information to take in and a huge amount to think about. So you'll be glad to hear that we're going to have a closing session. We'll be hearing the key takeaways from the day. And I'd like to invite Elsa Pilichowski, Director of the Public Governance Directorate of the OECD, to moderate the session and for the panel speakers to come up onto the stage.
Thank you very much to all. Thank you for still being here tonight. It's been a very, very long day, and thank you all for the thinking, the data, the analysis that we've had. So as Gillian mentioned, this is now the closing session of what I think has been a fantastic day. I hope you have taken from today as much as I have. And we will feed back as much as we can tomorrow. Oh, Minister, I'm sorry. Sorry, Minister, we have started without you, but this was unplanned, obviously. So before giving the floor to our great panelists here, let me open this last session with a quote from Prime Minister Bettel this morning and his fantastic speech. I'm translating in English directly. Let us not be powerless and defenseless witnesses facing a world that we believed belonged to the past, and let us remain vigilant in defending our democratic values. So we think that today has contributed to this. We will divide this session, we'll make it short, but we will divide this session into two sets of questions regarding first the need to cooperate to build trust and reinforce democracy, and second on the priorities for reinforcing democracy building on this great day. So we have 4 speakers and not 3. We have the Minister of Justice of Luxembourg, who is hosting this event today and who is chairing the ministerial meeting tomorrow on the same topic, Mrs. Sam Tanson. We have Mr. Jason Miller, who's the Deputy Director for Management, Office of Management and Budget in the Executive Office of the President of the United States. We have Mr. Christophe Deloire here, Secretary General of Reporters Without Borders. And we have Mr. Kevin Casas-Samora, Secretary General of International IDEA. So in terms of the first round of questions, let me turn immediately to our host and chair of tomorrow, Minister Tanson. Minister Tanson, Luxembourg took really the bold decision to chair and host these 2 meetings focused on reinforcing democracy in already well-established democracies. This is a difficult role to take. So why did you take this role? Why are you advancing this leadership?
I will switch to French, so if you need a translation, don't hesitate to get ready. Ok, c'est une très bonne question, mais en fait...
It's a very good question, but actually when I was asked that question, apart from the fact that my team was a bit afraid of the magnitude of it, I immediately said yes, because I thought it was the most basic issue that was arising for our democracies that have been put to the test during these last years at many levels. I'm not going to repeat what you've been hearing in the course of the whole day. the confidence crisis triggered by the COVID crisis, the wave of disinformation that followed, the Russian interventions in different electoral processes, now the war in Ukraine. So, as a result, we realized in Luxembourg that we're not an island. We're not an island, as you realized, probably. But as a small country, we are also affected by this kind of situation, and we must take action. As a small country, our interest is to take action all together, to join forces with others. It is the reason why this initiative by the OECD seems so important, because there is a network of countries that contribute, that take decisions, and that when tomorrow we're going to adopt a declaration bringing together what we're going to do to counter this problem of disinformation, because we need each other. We need to work together. So we need to agree on all these points. Thank you very much, Mrs. Minister. Working together, having all the countries sharing the same values to make progress together and take up the challenges for democracy is our priority.
Spreading, we're thriving, where we had a major increase in transitions to pluralistic systems. What has changed since then?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Elsa. It's a great honor to be on this panel. I mean, I would say that at the very least, 5 things have changed. Number one, the centrifugal forces pulling apart democratic communities are much more intense now. You know, runaway levels of polarization have become standard. Grotesque inequalities have increased. Number 2, the gap between social expectations about well-being and rights and the capacity of democratic institutions to fulfill those expectations has grown immensely, and is growing every day. It is as though globalization has democratized expectations about well-being and rights, but not the means to satisfy those expectations. Number 3, credible competitors to liberal democracy, that is, attractive alternative governance models have emerged. From the so-called illiberal democracies to the combination of capitalism and brutal authoritarianism best exemplified by China. Liberal democracy has credible competitors in a way that was not the case 30 years ago. Number 4, the soft power of major democratic nations, particularly in the West, has been greatly eroded by a series of blunders over the past 2 decades. The war in Iraq, the financial crisis and its aftermath, quite frankly, the hell-raising experience with Donald Trump. I mean, all those things have taken a toll on the attractiveness of liberal democracy at the global level. And number 5, the international environment has become less hospitable to democracy. That is, that autocrats and wannabe autocrats pay less of a price today for their transgressions of human rights and democratic principles. The result of all of this is that we are not nearly as exuberant about the future of democracy as we were in 1995. We are more conscious that this is not a linear process, that there are real dangers of reversion, and that this is a daily struggle. And I think that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. We had earlier a speaker talking on civic space, talking about the need to relegitimize democratic governance. And I think this is what it is about. Thank you very much. Christophe, as president of the Forum of Information and Democracy, you have played a role in initiating global dialogue between governments and civil society on providing democratic safeguards to the global information and communication space. We have talked a lot about that today. Can you briefly tell us about this initiative and why you chose to lead it at this time in history?
Pourquoi? Historiquement,
well, historically, the national democratic institutions have established guarantees in public debate and in terms of communication with the citizens in general. Civil society has contributed, for example, by reporting on the ethical principles of journalism. On the one hand, there was regulation by the parliament, and on the other hand, on the other side, the self-regulation by journalists in a global space. These systems of organization don't work so well anymore. The idea we had by launching the Partnership about Information and Democracy was to bring together democratic governments in order to work together on the creation of a democratic digital space, of which we need to define the system of organization, a number of democratic obligations that we need to impose upon those who dictate the standards of today, that is, the digital platforms. This is the reason why we've started initiatives that bring together civil society and governments.
Fédéralisme des démocraties. Nous avons commencé par une déclaration société civile avec de nombreux lauréats du prix Nobel, qui est devenu un partenariat intergouvernemental avec désormais 50 États.
With a Nobel Prize bringing together several states, the United States joined us in the summit we've just organized in New York. So it's a partnership that sets down general principles. This is not enough, so we need to do more. This is why we have created an enforcement organization, the Forum on Democracy, with two main objectives. That is to propose to the decision makers a synthesis of the research organization of the informal space, to have the equivalent of the report of the environmental group of experts on climate change, and to come up with recommendations for which formal legislations no longer apply, because we are talking about new topics that. So we have two lines of action: evaluation, recommendations, with 7 coalitions of states, with summits that can be compared to the conference of the parties to the climate process. The Observatory on Democracy is the equivalent of the high-level expert group on the climate change. So it's a process that will that is bound to go quite far. Thank you very much. We also hope we'll be able to work together on this in the future, and that, who knows, maybe creating a partnership with the OECD and other members of the civil society. Jason.
Proponent of democracy in the world. We've seen strong US initiatives, both nationally and internationally, on reinforcing democracy. What do you see as the biggest priorities within national borders, but also across countries in this area?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for this, and thank you, Minister, for hosting us at home and abroad. That's how I would talk about this question. So, as many of you know, at the UN General Assembly earlier this year, President Biden underscored the U.S. government's commitment to defend and strengthen democracy at home and abroad. The President put it, quote, "Democracy remains humanity's greatest instrument to address the challenges of our time." I've heard about the ways that that has been strained in terms of the confidence in democracy's ability to address the challenges of our time. But with allies and partners throughout the world, like we have today, tomorrow, we must demonstrate that unparalleled capacity to deliver for people and channel change peacefully. And it's been strained in a number of ways. The quote that in the United States we use the most to describe democracy is "of, by, and for the people," a quote that was attributed to Abraham Lincoln in the mid-19th century. Of, by, and for the people. 4 means we need to actually deliver. President Biden has focused our government, his administration, on that from the very first day. We have to be seen delivering for people to the benefit of hardworking people's busy lives. He often talks about people sitting around the table in the kitchen over a meal. What are the things that they are talking about? They're often not talking about international relations. They're often not talking about the politics within each of our countries. They're talking about everyday issues, and our governments have to be able to deliver on those issues that matter to people, that they spend their minutes on when they're around the kitchen table with their families. That's why we've worked with the US Congress to pass a number of historic pieces of legislation that invest in our infrastructure, that invest in our technological innovation, and it's focused on things like lowering healthcare costs, addressing climate change, fixing bridges, improving transit in cities, getting cleaner school buses that kids are riding on, things that matter to people, both massive global challenges like climate change and fixing the bridge that somebody drives across to get to work every single day. Second, we must continue to place emphasis on deepening connections with our partners and allies to advance a common vision and unified front, a unified front in the face of authoritarianism, and to counter transnational threats to democracy and human rights. In the previous panel and here, the clearest and most powerful recent example of our collective action in the face of authoritarian aggression is how we've come together to support the bravery of the people of Ukraine, and something that we need to demonstrate not just continually there, but elsewhere as we face new threats from authoritarianism that we've discussed today, and I look forward to us discussing further tomorrow. Third, we must continue our efforts to boost reforms to strengthen democratic institutions both at home and abroad. A thriving democracy must be responsive to the needs of its people. It needs to be responsive to community members who have a voice in articulating their needs in real time. It needs to be responsive not just through elections, but in setting policy and in executing policy and in delivering services. We need to find ways for participation in sometimes the mundane activities of governing. That participation reinforces trust, ensuring that people hear that their feedback matters, something that the OECD Trust Survey demonstrated, that their feedback matters in how their government is delivering for them. So those are the pieces that I think together we need as we think about the at home and abroad for strengthening democracy.
Thank you very much, Jason. And just to add maybe to what you said about the famous quote, today we had discussions about participation of citizens in policymaking. That seems to be one of the avenues for deepening our democratic models. Some people would like to add with the people at the end of this quote. So we're reflecting on that. Thank you very much. We're now going into the very, very final round of questions of today. We've discussed a multitude of potential avenues for reinforcing democracy throughout the day. But I would like to know, and in 2 minutes, because we're very, 2 minutes each, because we're very late today, which actions for you stand out as being the greatest priorities? And what messages do you want to give OECD member and accession countries tomorrow that will be meeting at ministerial level to discuss a way forward? So maybe we start with Jason.
Great. All right, I'm going to do my best to hit your 2 minutes. So first, I just want to reinforce the point I made at the top. We've got to be able to deliver. We've got to know if we're delivering, and if we're not, we need to be able to measure where we are falling short so that we can adjust. I noted this. We have to be able to listen as part of the delivery. The OECD Trust Survey, the specific point was that 60%, let me get this right. So those that felt that their feedback would be used to improve government services had a 60% positive trust in government, whereas those that did not see that their feedback would make a difference only had a 20% trust in their government. So making sure that our processes have a feedback loop that actually is responsive and demonstrates to people that responsiveness is really, really critical. Third point, we need to be able to engage our citizens in different aspects of what government does. So there are pieces where we may be very responsive because it's built into our normal processes, others that we're not, and we have to evaluate whether or not our fundamental process needs to be rethought so that we can have engagement models. One of the things that we've been very focused on is thinking about service delivery from the federal government to our customer. In each of those different aspects, whether you're getting a passport, whether you're getting some kind of benefit, whether you're getting a permit, the person on the other end of that service is the customer, and if you can put yourself in their shoes and treat them like the customer and meet their expectations, because their expectations are high, that is a key focal change for how government focuses, and oftentimes it means that we might need different people with different skill sets in government in order to meet that. Fourth and final point, we need new ways of leading and governing so that we refocus government on people. Oftentimes our organizations, especially as they age, increasingly focus on organizational structures and processes and administrative procedures. We need to keep focusing it on people. That's who we serve, and that's who our workforce serves. For us, that customer and the person that's serving them are the two most important things that we need to be focused on, our workforce and our customer. And we think that those things together can really strengthen how we execute, how we deliver.
Thank you very much. This is really about rebuilding the institutions, the democratic institutions, so that they are fit for the 21st century. Thank you very much. Maybe Christophe, your view on that.
Moi, je dirais...
Well, I'd say there are two lines we need to keep in mind. First, we need a systemic change to be implemented, not just one-shot initiatives to solve immediate problems. We need to tackle the roots of the problems and come up with solutions. There are solutions on the table, available. For example, the recommendations proposed within the framework of the Partnership on Democracy, the joint initiative to give a competitive advantage to quality journalism, the functional spaces on democracy. These solutions to be developed, and countermeasures or financial support to journalism are not enough. Then legitimacy. It is a fundamental question. We need to be able to reach out to the ordinary people. We won't save democracy if we exclude a large share of the population. So the question we need to ask ourselves about democratic deliberations, which are the common principles. Are we ready to agree upon? And there are things upon which we can agree about the need for independence or the respect of ethical rules, the prohibition of conflicting interests, but we should not stop standing for democracy, thinking that the others don't do it, that we are the only one being able to apply democracy, that we are the only ones not sharing fake news, etc. It's very important, otherwise we won't succeed. So we need to look for common denominators, common principles. So I think this is a nice way to end the day as well.
My main message is, I reckon, the same message that the very existence of this forum and the very existence of this program, this governance program, is trying to convey, which is that it is essential that we put the democratic governance agenda at the heart of public debates, and it is essential that we equip democracies to solve problems for people, particularly when faced with big crises. You know, we can make the case for democracy in terms of values until we go blue in the face. But for most people out there, when it comes to political systems, the proof of the pie is in the eating. We must take this agenda seriously, lest people give up on the ability of democracy to solve problems and run for the authoritarian option. And by a democratic governance agenda, I mean that we need to focus, on many things, but at the very least, on 4 things. Number 1, issues of institutional design, so that democratic systems are better able to adopt and implement decisions in an efficacious way, that they are recast for a new time. Number 2, questions about fiscal robustness. How to make possible that countries have a robust and fair tax base, which is obviously a huge issue in much of the developing world. Without this, there's no hope governments will be able to deliver public goods and services of adequate quality to citizens. Number 3, questions about how to improve the quality of public administration and public management, which is also essential if governments want to respond to social expectations. And number 4, finally, the critical issue of how to strengthen citizen trust in institutions. And this point is particularly crucial. We have a duty to help countries up their game to deal with the pandemic of corruption, which is pulverizing the legitimacy of democracies. If we don't do that, trust will never be built. And let me just flag that this governance agenda is especially vital in the context of the climate crisis, for which the pandemic was merely a warm-up. Climate change will become a test case for democracies' capacities to successfully confront existential issues for humankind. What use is a political system that is unable to protect the survival of human beings? Climate change is an existential issue for the planet, but in a narrow sense, it's also an existential issue for democracy. That's why this agenda matters fundamentally.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for taking it back to the issue of trust, which is really at the core of everything, and also to green democracy. We will have a session with the ministers tomorrow on that, and Minister Tansen is championing that topic as well. So the final words go to you, Minister, as the host. You have the final word of this panel, final word of today. How do you see the way forward?
En fait, je pense qu'on peut le
Well, I think this can be recapped around 4 words. Information, communication, participation, and OECD. As to communication, and as has been shown again in a report of the OECD about the crisis management, Luxembourg, communicating with the population is key. We need to explain what we do. We need to have the population on our side and to have honest exchanges with the citizen. This is key. Now, information, as has already been said, quality journalism is essential, and the figures in the Trust survey about the information media, well, there is a deficit of trust. So quality media, quality press, so press media that have time enough to deliver quality information. This is key for democracies, and we need to do everything financially with regulations to make sure that quality journalism remains. And then citizens' participation. This is also one of the major questions for democracy. If we involve people in the decision-making process, regardless of what is being decided upon, I think that we will much more quickly get the trust of citizens. If we take part in a decision, if we can discuss within the framework of a decision-making process, be it for daily issues or not, we feel involved, and that gives us more trust in the decision made. And finally, the OECD, because just has a statement that we're going to adopt tomorrow. That statement will include a lot of key elements that will lead to the implementation of that survey more regularly. So that is also a very good instrument for other countries to take the pulse and to take stock of the situation, and the other measures that will be implemented as well are a major step forward for us together to work in the same direction. Thank you, Madam Minister. So time has come to thank all the participants, the panelists, the speakers of the panel. The World Forum on the OECD that has taken place today has been institutionalized within OECD. That means that the 38 member countries make it a priority in the future. So it will regularly be organized. The partner countries, member countries have considered that it is a priority to work on democracy with the civil society, with partner countries. That is precisely what this forum is aiming at. So thanks a lot to each and everyone. I would also like to thank the OECD team, my team, the team of the Public Governance Department for the huge efforts that I have made in the last few months on democracy and for their leadership. And I'm quite proud of my team. And thank you to all.